Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Escape to the Point. Today, we are unpacking a major milestone in the ongoing India China standoff along the line of actual control, or the LAC, in eastern Ladakh. This latest development, a result of an agreement between India and China to disengage at the contentious point of Depsang and Demchok, has drawn widespread attention. This move comes after more than 4 years of diplomatic efforts, military posturing, and tense negotiations since the deadly Galwan clash in 20. This disengagement, confirmed in October 24, aims to restore patrol access and reduce immediate military confrontation along the paths of LAC. But this isn't just a story of soldiers stepping back, it's also a complex dance of strategy, diplomacy, and power politics. Today, we'll be examining the origins of this dispute, the specifics of the new disengagement deal, and the motivations that led both countries to the negotiating table, and importantly, how the Chinese public perception and social media has shaped the conversations online. Is this engagement a lasting step towards peace, or is it merely a tactical pause as both countries recalibrate their strategies? Let's take a look. To understand why this disengagement deal is significant, we need to take a closer look at the historical background of the India China border conflict. The dispute between India and China over their boundaries stretches back decades and is rooted in complex historical, strategic, and geopolitical factors. Boundary between the two countries, known as the line of actual control, or LAC, is a loose demarcation line that spans across 3,488 kilometers or so, from Ladakh in the west to Arunachal Pradesh in the east. However, unlike formally defined borders, the LAC is an ambiguous boundary. India and China have differing perceptions of where it actually lies, and this lack of clarity has led to and repeated standoffs and skirmishes. The roots of this dispute go back to the 1962 Sino-Indian War, a conflict that remains deeply ingrained in the collective memories of both the nations. In that war, China captured a strategic area known as the Aksai Chin, a high altitude plateau that connects both Tibet and Xinjiang. This region, still claimed by India, holds significant strategic value, but it remains under Chinese control to this day. Following the war, both the countries attempted to stabilize their borders through various diplomatic measures and agreements. It started with the confidence building measures, or the CBMs, of the 1990s. Agreements in 93 and 96 introduced protocols to limit troop movement and even banned firearms along the LAC. These CBMs worked for a while, preventing major incidents, but the lack of a formal borderline continued to create room for friction. The tensions simmered under the surface until June 2020, when they erupted in the Galwan Valley incident. In a brutal hand-to-hand confrontation involving sticks, stones, and metal rods, 20 Indian soldiers lost their lives. From the Chinese side, there were just 4 official names mentioned, but an estimated 15 more were found to be dead following these clashes. This incident, the first deadly clash in decades, shattered any remaining semblance of stability along the LAC. It prompted both the countries to ramp up their military presence in the region, deployed thousands of troops, heavy artillery, and created forward bases on either side of the LAC. Following Galwan, tensions escalated rapidly. China erected blockades at 6 critical points along the LAC, preventing Indian patrol from reaching designated patrolling points, or PPs as they are called, especially in the areas of Depsang Plains, Pangong Tso, Gogra, and Hot Springs. India responded by mobilizing troops to high altitude locations, including taking up key positions on the Kailash range. This standoff has persisted for over 4 years, with incremental progress achieved at certain points like Pangong Tso and Gogra. However, Depsang and Demchok remained unresolved due to their strategic importance. Both countries dug in, with neither side willing to take concessions until now. So, what does this new disengagement agreement entail? The deal was announced on October 21st, 2024, by India's Foreign Secretary Vikram Misri, who confirmed that India and China had reached an understanding on patrolling arrangements along the LAC. This announcement set the stage for a high-profile meeting between the Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi and Chinese President Xi Jinping on the sidelines of the BRICS summit in Kazan, Russia. This engagement specifically focuses on 2 friction points, the Depsang Plains and the Charding Nala in Demchok. Let's start with Depsang. In this area, Chinese troops had blocked Indian patrols at a point known as the Y junction. This junction effectively cuts off India's access to patrolling points 10, 11, 12, 11A, and 13. Under the new deal, India will regain access to these patrolling points. However, both sides have agreed to implement a coordinated patrolling system to prevent direct confrontation. This means that India and Chinese patrols will follow a synchronized schedule, reducing the chances of accidental clashes and allowing each side to monitor adherence to the agreement. At Charding Nala in Demchok, the Chinese had similarly limited India's movement, deploying forward units that prevented Indian patrols. Under the new agreement, both sides will dismantle temporary structures like tents and prefabricated shelters. The troops stationed tension there will pull back to more secure positions, ensuring that neither side has a forward presence that could provoke a confrontation. However, both sides are retaining their permanent infrastructure, such as roads and bases, indicating that while frontline positions are being vacated, the capacity for rapid mobilization remains. As of today, I have very confirmed sources, including satellite imagery confirmation, that India has got access to up to patrolling point 10 as of today, and the situation is also rapidly improving in Depsang and Demchok. So, what is happening in Pangong Tso area? The finger areas of Pangong Tso, with its narrow mountainous spurs extending into the lake, known as the Fingers, has been one of the most contentious flashpoints in the recent months. The finger area, located on the northern bank of Pangong Tso, comprises 8 mountain spurs, which are numbered from west to east. These spurs or fingers are referred to in military terminology for strategic reference points, and their control provides tactical advantages for patrolling and surveillance along the LAC. China claims the LAC runs up to finger 4, while India holds its extends up to finger 8. This discrepancy has historically led to frequent face-offs, particularly as both countries used to conduct overlapping patrols in this region. To provide a bit more context, until 2020, Indian troops used to patrol up to finger 8, even though they maintained positions close to finger 4. The region between finger 4 and finger 8 has been contested, with both India and Chinese forces frequently patrolling in this area. The engagement in the finger area reached a peak during the early months of the 2020 standoff. Chinese forces, using well-established logistical networks, quickly fortified their positions between finger 4 and finger 5, deploying troops in large numbers. In response, India mobilized its own reinforcements, creating a forward presence near Finger 4 and setting up defensive perimeters to halt any further Chinese advances. The disengagement is being executed in phases. Phase 1, which involves the removal of temporary structures and repositioning of troops, was expected to be completed by the end of October. Both armies are conducting verification through physical checks and their UAV monitoring to ensure this compliance. Now with this Phase 1 being completed and verified, the patrolling has resumed under carefully coordinated protocols, with regular monthly review meetings to address any new issues. Unlike earlier disengagements, which created buffer zones where neither side could patrol, the new agreement does not involve creating any buffer zones in Depsang and Demchok. In Depsang, for example, a buffer zone would prevent both India and Chinese patrols from accessing vast areas of strategically important terrain. Therefore, this deal is designed to restore access without establishing any kind of restrictive buffer zones. So the question on everyone's minds were, why now? Why did China, which has taken a hardline stance on territorial issues, agree to disengage at these critical points? And why now? Let's explore the strategies and economic motivations behind this move for both the countries. For India, this disengagement is a significant diplomatic achievement. It restores access to key patrolling points in areas that have been off limits since 2020, reinforcing India's territorial claims and demonstrating its resolve to negotiate from a position of strength. The agreement aligns with India's phased approach of disengagement, de-escalation, and de-induction, a strategy that has been consistent in New Delhi's diplomatic playbook since 2020. This approach, many feel, allows India to secure immediate gains while maintaining its long-term objectives along the LAC. From China's perspective, the timing of this disengagement is driven by several factors. China's economy is facing substantial challenges, including high youth unemployment, slowing growth, and a significant debt burden. These economic issues are compounded by increasing tensions with the United States and a fragile economic environment. With these pressures mounting, it is in Beijing's interest to reduce the friction with India, which is a key regional player. The timing was also notable because it aligned with the BRICS summit in Kazan. By reaching an agreement right before the summit, China paved the way for a diplomatic reset, allowing a high-profile meeting between Modi and Xi Jinping. Economically, there's also another angle here. China remains one of India's largest trading partners, and since the 20 clash, India has imposed, not to a large extent, but at least some restrictions on Chinese investments, banned over 300 mobile applications, which are majorly Chinese applications, and tightened the rules for Chinese firms from investing in any kind of business or joint ventures in India. There's a thought that this disengagement can, pave the way for a framework that could open the door to improved trade ties, though New Delhi has been very cautious about granting concessions. From the India standpoint, while India develops its military capabilities, it also needs time to bridge the gap with China's superior resources. For China, reducing tensions with India helps Beijing focus on its domestic issues with regards to its economy and also alleviate some of the diplomatic pressure it faces from the West. The Indian media has largely celebrated this as a diplomatic victory. The reaction on Chinese social media, for instance, has been mixed and at times volatile. Platforms like Weibo have seen an outpouring of sorts, with many Chinese netizens expressing disappointment and frustration over how the disengagement happened. For a country where nationalism is tightly interwoven with the government's legitimacy, any perceived backing down can provoke significant backlash. Rumors have circulated widely on Weibo, with some users claiming that President Xi Jinping has effectively ceded as much as 90,000 square kilometers to India. The number is, of course, exaggerated and has no basis in the official statements, but it reflects kind of a level of skepticism that has crept in among China's public. Many netizens are framing the disengagement as a concession that undermines China's territorial integrity, calling it a strategic retreat and questioning why China agreed to do a deal at all in the first place. Chinese social media has often amplified nationalistic sentiments, and this situation is no different. For some, the narrative of a powerful China appears inconsistent with the reality of stepping back in Ladakh, an area considered geopolitically critical by Chinese strategists. This discontent puts the Chinese government in a difficult position domestically as it strives to balance international diplomacy with internal stability. Some of the posts that I personally saw on Weibo had sentiments like India and China needing each other for economic benefits, especially if the USA gets offended by India's close relationships with Russia. Many of the netizens feel that it will be a way to alienate USA if India, China, and Russia can get together. Now, with Donald Trump's return, I wonder what else these diplomatic narratives will turn towards. There were a few other social media posts on Weibo that say that India has formulated a firm negotiation strategy of saying that if China wants to trade and have economic benefits coming from India, it has to make concessions at the border. Weibo users also feel that India has used this as a card. Another very interesting post that I saw on Weibo is that it blamed China and its transparency, saying that details of cross border issues, be it with India or Philippines that we see in the South China Sea, always come from foreign media and not local ones. Chinese netizens feel that even Russian media is much better than the local Chinese ones when it comes to such topics. In response to these social media sentiments, Chinese state media and officials have maintained a relatively low profile stance. Statements from the Chinese Ministry of National Defense and Foreign Ministry have been terse, emphasizing that the disengagement is progressing orderly and calling it a mutual resolution rather than a concession. Military spokesperson Zhang Yagang noted that the frontline troops are implementing the agreement but refrained from directly addressing public concerns. This domestic backlash highlights the potential risks for Xi Jinping's administration. China's economy is facing challenges, and the government has historically used nationalistic sentiments to unify public support. However, as the gap between rhetoric and reality grows, maintaining a consistent stance becomes more challenging for Beijing. The Chinese government will have to navigate these pressures carefully, as too much public discontent could impact its diplomatic flexibility in the future. Let's quickly shift gears and examine what this disengagement means for the future of India-China relations. Is this a genuine step towards sustainable peace or simply a temporary pause in an ongoing rivalry? Many experts, both in India and abroad, urge caution. For China, this disengagement appears to be a pragmatic decision, an opportunity to buy time and avoid escalation when it grapples with economic issues and international pressures. However, Beijing's long-term territorial ambitions are unlikely to have changed. The Chinese government has spent the last decade building infrastructure along the LAC, enhancing its capacity for rapid mobilization in case of future conflicts. From new roadways to tunnels to logistic hubs in Tibet, China's investments indicate that it is prepared for a protracted response along the border. India too has very well taken strategic steps to bolster its presence in Ladakh. In recent years, the Indian government has invested in the Darbuk-Shiok Daulatabad Oldie, or the DSDBO road, which provides critical access to the Depsang plains and bolsters supply lines for the Indian forces. Both nations are heavily invested in maintaining strongholds, saying that this disengagement is more about risk management than any shift in the long-term strategy. Some analysts are very specific about the kind of disengagement that is taking place, see that this coordinated patrolling mechanism in Depsang and Demchok is a potential model for managing other disputed areas along the LAC, such as the Yangtze Ridge in Arunachal Pradesh. If this current model is successful, this could serve as a blueprint for more comprehensive stability measures along the entire India-China border. However, implementing coordinating patrol along the LAC would require sustained diplomatic engagement and, more importantly, mutual trust, something that is currently missing between India and China. Military analysts that I spoke to also argued that while this disengagement reduces immediate tension, it doesn't address the fundamental drivers of the India-China rivalry. Both nations are vying for regional influence, which cannot be discounted, and both have strengthened their alliances, India with the Quad and the US, and China through its BRI initiative. Furthermore, while buffer zones have been effective in some areas, Depsang and Demchok remain strategic zones with high mobility on both the sides. The lack of a buffer zone in these areas leaves open the possibility of future friction, especially as both armies remain stationed within striking distance. Now, before we close, I think it's crucial to consider why India must remain vigilant and avoid placing complete trust in China despite the disengagement. While the agreement may reduce immediate tensions, the broader context of China's actions and strategic priorities suggest that India should tread carefully. Historically, China has shown a pattern of assertive and often aggressive behavior with its neighbors. There are many experts that also say that China's immediate goals or priorities are Taiwan and perhaps not India, and that's the reason this disengagement has taken place now in the first place. Of course, everyone also knows about the traditional salami slicing techniques of Beijing, taking small incremental steps to assert control without provoking a large scale conflict are very well documented. What this strategy does is, it usually allows China to gradually expand its influence and control over disputed areas, often catching nations off guard. In the case of India, China has repeatedly challenged the LAC's status quo. The 20 Galwan clash, which saw a deadly hand to hand confrontation, is a stark reminder of how quickly tensions can escalate. It's also very important to note that China's extensive infrastructure buildup along the LAC indicates a long term commitment to securing its claims, not just temporary border management. Roads, airstrips, and logistical hubs enable rapid troop mobilization and supply lines, putting China in a strong position to act quickly if tensions flare again. This infrastructure not only supports China's military but also signals its intentions to maintain a permanent presence along the contested areas, ready for potential escalations. China's strategic alliances also complicate matters. Beijing's strong relationship with Pakistan, a country that shares its own territorial disputes with India, creates a two front security concern for New Delhi, of course. China's provision of economic aid, military equipment, and diplomatic support to Pakistan always poses a significant challenge for India, particularly as both countries seek to increase their influence on South Asia. Any escalation along the LAC could be compounded by issues on India's western front, where China and Pakistan could coordinate pressures on India, creating a more complex security environment. Furthermore, China's broader geopolitical ambitions extend beyond South Asia. We know about initiatives like the Belt and Road Initiative. Beijing has sought to expand its influence across Asia, Europe, and Africa. I think one of the most important reasons for India's caution lies in China's ideological stance and its governance model. The Chinese government is highly centralized, like we all know, with the CCP wielding immense control over national policies and foreign relations. So, if in case there's an escalation of sorts, it's very easy for a centralized party like CCP to get the necessary approvals to do what it has to do to protect its interests across the LAC. Basically, what the CCP structure means is that decisions once made are unlikely to face significant internal checks and balances. India must consider that any diplomatic agreements could be reversed or adjusted unilaterally if the CCP's leadership finds it expedient. On the other side, China is also wary of India's rise with a degree of strategic discomfort. As India strengthens its alliances with the United States, Japan, Australia, and through the Quad, Beijing is likely to view New Delhi as a potential counterbalance to its regional aspirations. Now, with Donald Trump's return, India could possibly gain an upper hand again in the overall scheme of things. This new development may make China even more wary. For China, a strong India aligned with the West threatens its vision of being the dominant power in Asia. It's possible that China may use diplomatic engagements with India as a means to monitor, manage, or even influence India's foreign policy, particularly where it concerns the Indo Pacific security. I think one of the important points for India, which I would like to just throw a bit of a light on right now, and probably it's a whole new topic altogether where we'll have to have a separate video. I think from India's defense preparedness, I think our procurement strategy is something that really needs to take off, especially with regards to India's air force capabilities and other hardware infrastructure. While India has done really well in upping its infrastructure along the borders in terms of roads and airstrips, I think the Air Force infrastructure, the number of fighter jets we have, and the number of hardware equipment that we have procured over the last few years are still very small compared to what China possesses. In light of these factors, I think India must approach any agreement with China with a lot of caution. While diplomatic engagement is essential to maintaining peace and stability, New Delhi should also continue strengthening its own defensive and economic capabilities, maintaining vigilance along the border and fortifying its alliances. India's best approach for now is to engage diplomatically, but with a clear eyed understanding of China's historic behavior and long term objectives. So, to sum it up, for India, this deal is all about restoring its access to critical patrolling points, reinforcing New Delhi's resolve and strategic positioning. For China, it's a tactical move that aligns with its need to manage domestic economic challenges and improve relations with a key regional player. With that, I thank you all for tuning into SK to the Point. If you found this deep dive insightful, don't forget to share your thoughts in comments below. Let me know what you think. Does this disengagement represent a genuine step forward for India and China, or is it simply a case of strategic pause? Do comment on those things below. Until next time, stay informed, stay engaged, and stay tuned. This is SK signing off.